Morning, everyone. Welcome to the August 28th session of the Prescott Planning and Zoning Commission. I'm not going to bother introducing everybody. I think knows everybody else in the room. So we're going to be doing a discussion of the general plan, the 2014 general plan this morning. And before we get into it, I'd like to just mention that I had two misunderstandings of the general plan when we first started this thing. First, I felt that since we were the planning commission had to use it as a guideline in making recommendation to the city council, that the plan should be something that was realistic and doable. And I've since, in reading it through it and talking to everyone, I've come to the conclusion that it is a document. It's more of a vision of the future, and it doesn't necessarily have to be real. And that was kind of a light bulb going on my eye, because then when I read through it, I had to read it, I had to go through and look at it differently, okay? So I think I went from having 10 pages of comments down to about 2, you know? So anyway, my other misunderstanding was, I felt the way that the procedure of this whole thing worked. General Plan Committee went through their process. It took a long time. Finally gave us a draft, and then it would go to the Planning Commission. Planning Commission would take comments from the public and make their own conclusions and comments. And then the misunderstanding was, I thought all of those comments would then go back to the General Plan Committee, and they would do a final edit and come up with a final document for us to approve up or down. Now I'm being told that that's not the way it's happening, that the General Plan Committee basically says we're through. So here we are. You know, I've got a draft document to deal with. I've got all these comments, okay, that we've collected over the months. And now how do we get those, where do we make the decision of which of those we want to modify and incorporate and which we don't? Because I no longer, my understanding, excuse me, of having the General Plan Committee to help me do that, that's gone. So we need to talk about procedures from this point out, okay? How do we end up with a document that we can vote up or down, excuse me, and recommend to the City Council? George.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the things that you and I had a discussion of yesterday was your very concerns about how do you get to the end of the process, at least the end of the Planning and Zoning Commission's process. One of the key concepts under Arizona statutes relating to general plans is that if a community like ours has a planning commission, that planning commission is the reviewing body that recommends to the City Council any adoption or readoption of the general plan. So your role is to make a recommendation to the City Council. There are a number of different ways that you can get from a draft to a recommendation. Typically with the processes used here in Prescott, a committee was appointed to do the drafting work of the rewrite of the plan. That committee's draft was intended by the committee, as well as understood by staff, to be handed off like a baton in a relay race to the Planning Commission for your review. You hold the public hearings to allow the public comments about the plan. The committee doesn't hold those. We had meetings, but they weren't technically and legally public hearings. And those comments get incorporated into the plan as you desire them to be incorporated into the plan. Now, all of those public comments will still go on to the City Council so they can see which comments were included and which weren't included by this body. That's part of the public process set out by Arizona statutes. But the stage we're at this point is that the committee has finished what they consider to be a good and final draft from their perspective, and they have handed it off to the Planning and Zoning Commission to complete the work of modifying the plan and recommending it on to the City Council. There are a number of different ways to approach that from the Planning Commission perspective. You can, though staff doesn't recommend it, go through line by line and edit the plan. We certainly anticipate that you will go through and read it line by line, fully understanding what's in there, what the concepts are, what issues jump out at you as those needing to be addressed by this group. But we anticipate what will really come out of this is something similar to what happened last time, and that was long ago. That was more than 10 years ago now, with the 2003, the current active plan. And that was the P&Z commissioners reviewed the plan, and they came back with issues. Each commissioner came back with a short list of issues that they wanted to discuss. They were either problems, concerns, or absences of topics. Things they wanted to see in the plan, things they wanted to see worded differently, or things they wanted to see out of the plan. And those were discussed among the commissioners at public hearings, at public meetings, allowing further public comment, until you reached a point where you were all in general agreement about what should move forward. It's not a line-by-line, word-for-word edit. If we start that process, we will be still here meeting next year to do that. That's not what needs to be done. That was the committee's job. Now your job is concepts, bigger picture issues. Did we address things that needed to be addressed? Did we address them in a manner or a direction different than you think should be recommended to City Council? And then bring those together and have a discussion amongst yourselves and a consensus reached on including, excluding, modifying those concepts. The actual wording to get there is something that we will do. That is a staff function. We're the typists, we're the editors. You're the concept reviewers. You're looking at the plan from a little bit bigger picture. Don't read it paragraph by paragraph and say, I don't like this paragraph. You're looking at the concepts that the plan is trying to address and saying, taken as a whole, Article 5 needs to be modified because it didn't address the aging of the community. It didn't address excessive water drawdowns by private wells. It didn't address public transit. I mean, there are concept issues that you need to discuss. You certainly want to look at any recommendations from the public or comments from the public in detail, and you have a packet of them. There are 5 attachments that were part of your agenda packet along with the draft plan from the committee. Each of those needs to be reviewed in detail, but you don't necessarily have to discuss line by line those concepts. If you want to say, gee, we love attachment 3 and we think it belongs in a plan, you just tell staff, attachment 3 goes in the plan. We make that happen. You don't have to. You will get a final version of it to read again before you make a final vote and recommendation to the City Council. So that sort of lays out the bigger piece pictures. You guys are not here to determine whether it's a colon or semicolon. You're here to determine whether we've hit all of the appropriate topics in the way that you think should be passed on to the City Council.
Okay, so we're going to have to develop a consensus of a certain number of items, okay? I think the most difficult part would be to come to a consensus of comments from the public. And of course, we really haven't had an opportunity to review those in detail because we've gotten a whole bunch here lately. And I think we can go through and develop a list of comments that we think are important. In most cases, I think most of those items that I've come up with are things that are omissions, are things that I felt should be a higher priority. I think I've only got one item that I think just shouldn't be in the plan at all. But I realize we can't take a draft and pile on a bunch of comments and give it to the City Council, because then we're not recommending anything.
Right. You need a final draft
chaos.
from this body.
It'll be total chaos. So we need to have a final adjusted document that we can vote up or down and send to the City Council. Right?
That's what we anticipate you doing, yes, sir.
Okay. And see, I had anticipated on that final draft being done by the General Plan Committee, and so that's where the process has changed. And the dynamic of the whole thing, in my mind, has kind of changed a little bit. You know, what do you think, Lynn?
Well, I'm not gonna get into a discussion here because I had the opportunity when I was appointed as a councilman to replace Councilman Hanna, and one of the tasks as a councilman was I served on the General Plan Committee. And I found that they had lively conversations. They thoroughly went through this document, took out some of the things they didn't like, added some differences, and got hung up on language. And that both Terry Marshall and the young woman who was co-chairman and chairman did a great job in getting a document to come this far. And I approved it as a member of the General Plan Committee to be sent on. I certainly don't want to sit here now and tell you what I didn't like as an individual, but as a consensus, the General Plan Committee forwarded it to us, and I think that it's a big improvement over the previous plan we had with the modifications and changes in language that they did. Are there some things I don't like? Yes, but I have to live with the majority of it. So as a member of the General Plan Committee, I'm not going to comment line for line or section by section. My recommendation would be that we've got a plan. It's been approved by the General Plan Committee to go on to P&Z. We're looking for public input, and I don't think I, as a former member of the General Plan Committee, should sit and criticize or add or delete from something that may have come up that I don't totally agree. Like with you, Tom, I don't agree with the free form, but it's something I don't think is going to happen, where we have a free form code running alongside our other
form-based.
Form-based code, excuse me. So.
Well, okay, that's a comment. All right. Okay. I think to get this thing rolling, you're pretty much, you heard what I had to say, and you got any response, any further response to that?
Again, I think the initial concept that you discussed with staff was that you were going to request that your commission members develop a list of topics that they think need to be discussed, that they can bring before this body and focus on those discussion items. Now, whether those items are concepts or text that was produced by the General Plan Committee, or those that have come from public comment, is up to the individual commissioners. Bring those before you.
Okay, let me ask you then. We can do that.
Yes.
Okay. It's going to be very difficult sitting in a public forum trying to pull together a list. Okay. Is there any way, Mr. Petracchi, that we can get together with all this information in an executive session of some sort and distill this stuff down? Or can I get 2 or 3 of the members and create an ad hoc committee to absorb it all and distill it down? How can we do this? It's going to be really hard in a public forum.
Well, either of those options are available to you.
Okay.
But, know that the executive sessions are for very limited. Yeah, I'm sorry, thank you. Either of those options are available to you, but know that executive sessions would be purely for legal advice as opposed to allowing you to kind of hash out the document. So that's probably not going to work unless you have legitimate legal
how
questions.
Do we hash it out? Is there any way?
You could set up a subcommittee. That subcommittee would be a public body, like any other body, subject to the open meeting laws.
Okay.
And they can meet and workshop this thing out.
Would have to be advertised?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, those are your options, or your other option is to continue meeting as your regular Planning and Zoning Commission with 7 members and trying to hash it out. Where are we at in the process now, George, as far as public comment, written public comments?
We've had one public hearing and received comment, and we're going to have another public hearing.
So on September 25th, We're going to have another public hearing to get additional comments. Based on your last public hearing, apparently there were some written concerns that were given to you.
So after
You
the
could certainly
25th
direct staff maybe to kind of pull together.
Well, we can get our,
And you know, you can send it, you direct staff to kind of take all those public comments and put them into some sort of usable form for you as a committee, addressing, you know, here are kind of the themes that we've received.
that's a very good suggestion for the public
And then
comments, yes.
when we come back to the regular meeting on September 25th, which is going to be a public hearing as well, we can have sort of a breakdown or spreadsheet for you indicating, you know, we've received this many comments, you know, 25% seem to focus on this section of the general plan, 10% seem to focus on this. And that may help you kind of distill some of the information.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman, we can do the same thing with the comments from the commissioners. If they provide them to staff, we can consolidate them together. I think one of the things that we saw when we were working on the 2003 plan was that it was not uncommon for the commissioners to come back with the same topics. So you may have 3 commissioners want to talk
with
about
the
a
same
particular
item.
section.
Oh, yeah, and
So-
we'll find that out.
Yeah, you wouldn't necessarily end
Yeah.
up with a list of 5 to 10 items per commissioner and multiply it times the number of commissioners. It's going to consolidate
I
itself
understand
because
that.
of key topics.
It might come down to a matter of me providing you with a final list of comments that I've kind of gleaned from the commissioners, but I think it's a great idea if you guys could go through the public comments and come up with items that you think we should, you find important for us to consider, possibly as a modification to the draft, okay? Because a lot of those are pretty detailed. And of course, we haven't had a chance to read it, but it's true, we need to wait till after the 25th then to do any of that, right?
But you do have public comments, and they were included in your packet this time.
Yeah, but we haven't
Those-
had the time to really distill them, or read them.
I would suggest that since you have those in your possession, though, that it would be appropriate for the commission to review and consider those, rather than have us give you a giant lump of comments all at once.
Okay, well,
Perhaps you're staging it through.
We can do that before,
prepared to
prior to the
talk about-
25th.
So
Okay.
if the commissioners came back with, or provided staff with a list of their topic areas or their focus areas that they would like to see discussion, we can provide you that in the next agenda packet. You will have an opportunity between now and then to complete the review of the committee's draft of the plan and the draft comments that you've received so far and that are included in the packet. And you'll actually have started the process before the end of the second public hearing, which is certainly appropriate. You don't have to
Okay.
wait till the end of next meeting to do that.
Okay. George?
Yeah, yes, and, you know, in my case, I was on the general plan committee, and I had the comments from the public, from P and Z, and also from the committee. And I went through and I have redlined about 40 or 50 probably items which Lindsay had brought forward in terms of where would this fit in the plan, this is good, or this is somewhat duplicate of what we have over here, and so on and so forth. So I have a lot of that kind of detail that could be provided to staff, but I don't know how appropriate that is to have one commissioner working a level of detail beyond what the other commissioners are working at, or in terms of incorporation into the document.
I don't know that we would discourage you from spending as much time or detail as you want in reviewing the plan. I just think for discussion purposes at that planning commission that having sort of global topics or larger perspective topics is probably a more appropriate approach. If there are specific language changes or wording changes that you would like to see, we can consolidate those into a single document that we hand back to you and say, here's a recommendation to change the wording of section 4, or here's the change to paragraph 5 of article 5, you know, whatever those issues are. You guys can look at those and sort of acknowledge them by consensus. You don't have to go through and debate each one of those changes. If it's something that can be provided to us in a manner that's easy and concise to pull from to create that list, we will certainly be happy to do that. It, again, will stop you from spending 30 hours at public meetings reviewing line by line, which is, I believe, not your job. You're looking at the concepts of the plan and the purpose of the plan and whether it accomplishes what state statutes require and what you believe the city council wants out of a general plan. It isn't your job to decide whether or not, you know, a paragraph starts with B or A.
No, I understand that, and we can do that. We can put together, I can put together a list of the important concepts important to the commissioners, because we're going to be discussing those in the this meeting and next meeting. But I think it would help us a lot if staff could help with the public comments and distilling those down to actual concepts or questions or, you know, things. Do you guys think this should be modified, or is that possible? I mean, can you guys do that? Okay. And then what we have in terms of concept, you can put into words.
If the commissioners have those concept discussion topics, if you want to call it that, and
Right.
provide them to staff,
Let's call them focus topics, okay?
we will provide for your next meeting a list of that consolidated list of all of the commissioners' concerns into one
Okay.
document, and we will be able to do the same thing with any public comments that have been received so far or that we receive between now and your next meeting.
Okay.
And just, you know, as always, be cognizant of the open meeting law. Anything that you provide to us, send directly to the staff members, not to each other. Okay?
Right.
No emails between the 7 of you. Individually, if you have concerns, send an individual email to George. That's part of the public record. George will provide that in the reports that he's preparing. And that way you kind of avoid any open meeting law violations.
Okay,
So what
but-
I'm at least hearing now is you want two things to occur. One, staff can certainly take the public comments and kind of distill those into a more usable, friendly form for you guys. And two, you're thinking about individually going through the plan and providing your individual comments to George.
That's correct, but is there a problem with the individual commissioners submitting their comments to me?
Yes, don't do that.
Well, you guys are making it harder and harder.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm trying to look at this thing realistically, how to
It's the
get
old,
through
it's
it.
the, what they call the daisy chaining problem in the open meeting law, where one person may do an email saying, I want to see this happen, and then he sends it to 4 commissioners.
You're right, right.
And the 4 commissioners goes, hey, that's a good idea. You've just made
If
a
this is-
public decision in a
This
non-open
isn't a matter of
meeting.
trying to circumvent or hide anything. I'm just trying to figure out a way that I could come up with a final list to give to staff so that they can put it in a decent form. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I think it's going to work the opposite way. If that's the way you want to do it, then provide the list to staff. Staff will distill it as best it can. It'll provide the background documents too, so it's
But
all in the
it's-
record. But
Okay.
the other
But
option
you're
is
saying give it to them individually. They
Individually.
can't give it to me. I can't make a list and give it to him
you can make your own list as
based on our
Tom
discussion,
Menser.
right? Okay.
At an open meeting, after
At an
today's
open
meeting, you can
meeting.
do
Okay.
that, yeah.
Okay.
Tom, are you, you're thinking of an efficient way to avoid.
Right, exactly,
duplication and overlap.
exactly,
Just-
exactly.
and
Yeah.
It sounds like.
I understand.
But it sounds like I can't do that. I can't be efficient.
No,
Okay.
no, government often is set up not to be efficient.
And
Okay.
I'm going to
Joe?
be gone on the 25th,
Okay.
but if, and I'm leaving town on the 23rd, I think. But if I could get the comments, you know, this report in advance, then if I have anything to say, I can just shoot you an email.
We generally put the agenda packet together 1 week prior to your meeting.
Okay.
So that would be
Anyway, that'll work for me.
17th or so. We would get it to you as soon as possible after that, and we can send it by email.
And then, just as a comment, I think, you know, Lynn's comment of, you know, the work that's gone into this by the committee, you know, I did read through the comments that we received, and like anybody else, there are pieces in there that I like, there are pieces I don't like, and same thing with the general plan. There are things that I like about it, there are things I don't like about it, but I don't feel it's appropriate for me to get in and start picking it apart because of the work that's gone into its community vision. I'm just one member of the community. I don't see any, glaring issues.
But
that-
you will have some items you want to discuss? I know
I think
you-
I'll more respond to the other, I had earlier brought up the question of the group homes, and I have thought, that's something that maybe is not a vision of the future, which I am now seeing the general plan more as it is a political issue to be hashed out by the city council. I mean, I don't know if it's appropriate in this, and it's really just kind of my issue, and I don't want to get involved where it's, I figure if it's my issue and I really want it to be addressed, I need to go to the council meetings or get on the next general plan committee or work in other ways rather than just tossing it in here at the end.
Well, see, when you brought it up at an earlier meeting, I thought it was a very valid addition to the general plan because, the consideration of recovery and rehab facilities, they affect neighborhoods, they affect people, they affect quality of life, and that's certainly something that should be in a general plan. So I thought you should give us something.
You can run with it. That's fine with me.
I will do that. It's one of my comments too. But I got it from you. Mr. Lamerson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Menzer. As a liaison for the P&Z, I thought it would be appropriate for me to make a comment at this particular point, remembering that we're in a democratic republic, okay? And it all goes downhill. Each one of the committee members were handpicked by the city council as a reflection of what, through the Growing Smarter process, the community would desire to have as a vision for the city. Each one of you were hand appointed by the city council because of the confidence we have in you via your professional prowess, community involvement, etc., to take a look at this document before you send it on to us and give us a reflection of how it affects planning and zoning. And that's what, as one, I'm not speaking for all 7 council members, as one council member, that's what I'm hoping for, is to get from you the reflection of how P&Z would interpret what's in the general plan as how it is appropriate for P&Z as we vet things that come through the city, and we work as a team, and we try and adhere to what the community would desire, the realistic aspects of, can we really expect Prescott to grow beyond the water? No. Can we really expect to annex more dirt than we can provide basic services for? No. And we have different parts of the involvement that we look to different groups of people. And like I said, from the Growing Smarter initiative, we look to the public to provide us an opportunity to see what their desires are. How can we legally do this, and how can we realistically do this? And that's where we come to P&Z, and that's what I'm hoping to see out of P&Z, to go through the document, see what's realistic. You guys know the codes. You guys work with legal. You know what we can and can't do with certain things. And I agree with the attorney. Most of it needs to be done in public. It needs to be shared with the public as we vet this document out. This is an important document to get done. So I thought I would speak to you right now because I see the deliberation that's going on.
Thanks, Jim.
Mr. Chairman, just a follow-on to Mr. Lamerson's comments was a good segue into the process. When this commission is finished with a recommendation and moves the document on to the city council, we understand from council that their intention is to have a series of public workshops to go through this. Your edits will not be final edits. The city council will make the final edits. They will prepare or complete a document that will be presented to the voters of Prescott sometime next fall for ratification. So as hard as it is to spend a lot of time editing and reviewing and reading a document, you also have to keep in the back of your mind that you're not the last one to do that, that the city council will in fact go in and potentially could change things that you change either back the way they were or to something entirely different. It is integrated into the process to have multiple reviewing agencies and multiple bodies who will edit this document.
I understand that, but we also can't just take a draft plan and a whole stack of comments and hand it to the city council. It'll be total
Absolutely.
chaos.
No, that's
And then
not.
we're not doing our job.
That's not your role. Your role is to recommend to them
Okay.
a completed document. It may recommend including some of the public comments. It may recommend not including other
Okay.
of the public comments.
And I was going to ask for comments from any of the
Mr. Chairman,
members
this,
of the
may I
committee.
speak on the process, not as a member of the public
Oh,
commenting
okay.
on the plan?
Okay.
When Councilman Lamerson asked me to serve on this general plan committee, I had really serious reservations because I was chairman of the last plan committee, and I worked on the one before that, when we had 11 committees putting their work together for you. I'm now a member of the public because the committee has been dismissed by its own vote. No action have I seen from the council directing the committee that they thank us and our work is done. But it is, essentially, you're in charge. I want you to remember this is the community's statement of its desires for the future. When I spoke to the mayor and council the day I accepted the appointment, I reminded them that strategic planning has not been a feature of this council's work for many years. And the next step for your work to be satisfactory and useful is that the city council appoints a strategic planning process after the general plan is adopted. This is chapter and verse for this commission, for the city council during their budget process, of translating into recommended action year by year for the decision-making groups in this community. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Of course, I'm going to have to think through that strategic planning thing, because the general plan is not a mandatory document, so, what would the strategic planning group, would they use it as a strict guideline, or? I got to think through that whole issue. Yes, sir.
Gary Worup. I also served on the general plan, and I had the good fortune, several of us, to go to Prescott Valley to observe theirs. I think they set a precedent which may help you and ease your burden. What they did was they went through each section at a meeting, designated that those were the sections they were going to cover, and their representative in the position that George has, Richard, who actually used to work for Prescott, stood up and went through any of the changes that they recommended, and then they approved that section. It was done. So it really does ease the burden. Rather than go through the minuscule, which we did for 3 years, you go, as was recommended, through the overall objective of each section and approve it. Seems to me to be, we've done the work. Now you should enjoy the concepts and approve those concepts rather than the minuscule.
That's where I'm hoping to get us, to the comments and distill those down.
Right.
To comment to information that we can vote actually to include or not include.
Right.
At this point.
As I said, they did section by section rather than the whole plan.
Yeah, well, we can do that too.
I have one other comment, which is why I really came today. What I think that we failed miserably in this plan is we did not touch demographics enough or at all. I've been now working on the concept of moving Prescott in some areas forward. We're going to do a symposium in January at Prescott College. And one of the areas that I was reminded of is people coming to Prescott or looking to come to Prescott or are here don't really have an information or referral service, so they can understand what is it that will meet their needs. For instance, if I'm a senior or a retiree, and we are 52% retirees in Prescott, what is really here for me? How do I find that out? I don't think we address really adequately or at all in the plan. If I'm going to look at this, where in the plan does it say go to addendum or amendment X, Y, or Z for agencies like Dennis Garvey has at Yavapai College, Area Agency on Aging? Where are those references? If I'm a young person, and Councilman Lamerson brought this up earlier, what do we really serve, or what do we give opportunity-wise for people with children coming here? Where is the actual, this is a vision. If I'm going to come to Prescott, what vision do I have to look at? I don't think we did a very good job, or any job at all with that, so I think it's missing.
Well, it's a pretty complicated process, too, so, I mean, I was surprised that only one place in the general plan it said that that Prescott was a retirement city. You know, it was never stressed, and which surprised me, because, you know, it is. There's a lot of, I don't know, a lot of things I felt there were some omissions or things that weren't prioritized that maybe should have been. Okay, anybody else in the general plan? Dan?
My name is Daniel Mattson, and although I am not an official member of the committee, I did attend every single meeting, and I put input into the entire plan. I personally don't think the committee is done. I think our commitment included, or their commitment, and I agreed to take on the same commitment, was to follow this plan all the way through to the voting. We agreed to take part in the public meetings and actually even the advertising of the plan, because the city staff is not allowed by law to advocate for the plan once it reaches a certain point, and the members of the committee had agreed to do that. I also agreed to do that, and by the way, I'd like to be notified of any meetings or even the committee meetings, because I intend to attend every one of them. I would like to suggest, okay, when the committee got together, they were told it would be 12 months to 18 months, and here we are in what, month 39? And so a lot of the people fell by the wayside, understandably. And so there are some problems with the fact that it went so long that some of the people just couldn't continue the commitment. But I would suggest that going forward, consideration is given to all the discussion that took place in committee before. These documents were very thoroughly discussed, line by line, sometimes word by word. We spent time deciding should this be a comma or a semicolon, or, I mean, there was a lot of discussion that went into this, and it was all very intentional. As an example, the concept of discussing recovery homes was intentionally left out because it wasn't part of the vision of the community to become a recovery home center. And some people felt that if we were not careful about the wording, we would either invite more of it or say something in the wording that could get us into trouble from a legal point of view. And it was decided that maybe we should just leave that part alone. There was a lot of discussion about that. It wasn't just some haphazard, none of us think it's a good thing, move on. We discussed it. And if I remember right, legal said something about it at one of your meetings. And if I remember right, he said he'd get back with you and let you know what sort of landmines he could see in it, if my memory serves me right. So we want to be real careful about what we include on that hot potato. And perhaps it doesn't belong in the general plan. I understand what you're saying, but if you think it through, one wrong word there, and we could have these guys filing a lawsuit against us for bad-mouthing them. Another wrong word, and we could be inviting everybody in the country to come open a recovery home. Maybe it's better just to not mention it.
And then we turn around and end up with 160 of them because no one said anything.
Well, the city council is working on doing what they can within the law to regulate the industry. So that's something that would have to be considered very, very carefully, because there could easily be unintended consequences. when I looked through the recommendations by Lindsay, I noticed, okay, one thing that we decided very early on as a committee was that the 2003 plan was too long and wordy, that it wasn't likely to be heavily used because you had to dig through so much stuff to find the value. And it was decided early on by the committee and agreed on by the committee as a whole, not necessarily every person in the committee, but by consensus certainly, that we wanted a shorter document. And that's why we omitted a lot of things. And when I say we, well, you know, I was there, so I'll go ahead and say we, even though I wasn't officially a committee member. I would be hesitant to add back a lot of stuff that the committee decided, discussed, and voted on not including, and let it go by just because of the fatigue of the committee. So I would like to suggest that we have some institutional memory involved in the discussions.
Well, I'm going to rely heavily on George for that in our discussions.
Please do, and feel free to rely on me also.
No, this George.
Right.
This George.
This George.
This George.
That George. Terry.
And Terry, right.
Right. And like I said, I intend to have my nose in this all the way to the very end. Because I made that commitment at the beginning. I think it's a very important thing. And, you know, some of these discussions that I remember, I was on the losing side, but I still feel that we need to honor the committee's work and bring to memory, hey, we discussed this, we decided to do it this way because of that. Even if I didn't agree with it, I still feel that honoring the committee is an important thing, and we should keep that in mind.
Well, we appreciate that.
Okay.
And like I said at an earlier meeting, you're a wealth of information to us, so stick around.
I intend to.
Okay, George, you going to comment before I talk to Lindsay?
Just to follow up on Mr. Mattson's comments,
Okay.
Two good points. One, the committee's role changed when they finished the draft, but it didn't end. They are a resource that can be used by both this body and the city council to find out why and how things were put into the plan the way they were. We've talked to the committee members. We talked to them at their last formal meeting before passing this draft on to you about being available and aware that when we have public hearings and when we have meetings where you're going to be editing or modifying the plan, that they will have as many of the members who can make it available at those meetings to provide you some of that background should you want it.
Okay.
The other issue is in moving the plan forward, there's no reason why the committee members and the public wouldn't be involved all the way through to the very end of the council's adoption of that. So again, it's not over.
I hope so.
Can I make a couple other comments?
Joe?
Just came up from the discussion. One, if I were doing this from the start, I'd look at whatever town in Arizona had the shortest general plan and try to copy that, you know, put it through the Xerox machine. I mean, you know, shorter is better, it might get read, those sorts of things. I mean, but I'm not going to sit here and say, well, we should chop half of this out because that's not my job. In terms of this as a resource document for people coming to town, you know, if I come to town, I'm going to Google it. You know, I'm going to go, you know, Senior Services Prescott, put it in my phone and see what comes up. I mean, I'm not going to read the general plan. That's just the nature. I went to a presentation Monday by a gentleman, very high-tech guy, and basically, you know, everything is on our phone, and that's all people use. If you lose your phone, you're lost. If you lose this general plan, you're not lost. You know, so, and another thing I'll do when I get home tonight is I'll look up Prescott and Wikipedia, see what they have to say. I mean, talk about an evolving document. Yeah. That's it. So, anyway, those are my comments.
Thank you.
Okay, Joe. Lindsay? I need to start with a name and address, and then we have to do that.
Okay. Lindsay Bell, 368 Dogwood, here in Prescott.
Okay, could you kind of briefly tell us what you've done? And then if you want to get into it, maybe just give me a synopsis of, you know,
okay,
as you go through it.
Okay.
Okay.
I would point out, before I do that, You have, with your opening comments, mentioned that the general plan is a vision, and it certainly is that. But I would like to remind you that it's not only a vision for the community, but it's also a broad statement of general policy that guides land use, circulation, and all the other elements. So it's both a policy document, very broad-based, not a lot of detail, as well as a vision statement. This has been an interesting journey. My comments, you certainly have gotten a lot of documents from me in terms of comments. I'll kind of walk back through that process and what you have in front of you for today's packet, for today's meeting. I came to the Planning and Zoning public hearing, provided public comments. Because of my background, because I was on the previous two committees and have been involved for more than 30 years with planning processes with the city of Prescott, I probably had a few more comments than other members of the general public. After I met with you all and had a very extensive discussion with the P&Z Commission at that public hearing, you and staff asked me to summarize my comments in writing, which I did. Those comments were mainly, when I put it in writing, it was mainly conceptual. I had a couple of specifics, but it was largely conceptual and followed along with the comments that I had made at the public hearing. Subsequent to that, my friend Elizabeth Ruffner, who is on the committee, and she and I have worked together for many years, she asked me to suggest actual language that might be inserted to support the comments that I had brought forward. So I took the memo that I had previously submitted and added actual language to that, which made it obviously a longer memo. That document I took to a meeting of the General Plan Committee, and we started the process of going through it line by line. It was very laborious. It was very fatiguing to the committee, and believe me, I've been roundly criticized for my comments. But at the conclusion of that meeting, the committee asked me to revisit. We had quite a bit of discussion about Chapter 4. Chapter 4 previously was critical challenges. The big things that are facing the city over the next few years that the city has to be especially concerned with. The committee felt that that chapter should be a general plan summary. My opinion was that the content of that chapter was still critical challenges for the most part and not a summary. Out of that discussion came their request to me to revisit the summary issue, which I did, and the best way that I could see to move forward to blend my concerns and to respond to the committee's concerns was to merge chapters 3 and 4. I did that. You have that draft, which combines previous chapter 3, which was existing conditions and trends, and chapter 4, which in the draft was general plan summary, and I combined that into a new chapter 3 entitled existing conditions, emerging trends, and next steps. So you have that in front of you. Also out of that discussion about a summary, I had drafted the executive summary for the 2003 plan, so I offered to draft an executive summary for this plan, which could be included as a chapter in the plan itself or provided to the public and community members as a separate document, whatever is the wishes of the city. But I have drafted an executive summary, and you also have that in your packets. And I am happy to address any questions or comments that you might have regarding from any of those documents. I can do that today, I can do that at the subsequent meeting or whatever, and I'm happy to do it on one-on-one meetings as well if there's something that you don't understand from the comments I've made. I would summarize the comments if we're trying to get back to concepts. I would say that the major omissions that I noticed in reviewing the draft and forwarding my comments, the CDBG process is not addressed. That's a big change in the city's functioning from the 2003 plan. So I think that should be addressed. The group home issue is definitely a controversy in the community, and I think it should be addressed at a broad level of policy, not very specific, detailed level of policy, but a broad level of policy that acknowledges that this is an issue that the community is grappling with.
I'm sorry, Lindsay, go back to the first item. What was that?
CDBG, Community Development Block Grant.
Oh, okay.
The city has since become, I think you call it an entitlement community, whereas before, and when the last plan was written, the city got CDBG grants about every third year. So the CDBG, the group home issue, I had some real concerns about the housing sections, and there are housing sections in both the land use and in the economic development, and some mentions of housing in the cost of development and growth management sections. My overall concern is that those housing sections didn't adequately address the affordability gap, which I believe, and I think there's a lot of research out there that shows the affordability gap is the biggest housing problem we have, that we have people in the community whose household income will not allow them to purchase or rent in our market because they just don't have the income to do it. Affordability gap, really important concept, and I thought it was not
It is
not emphasized enough in the general plan.
But what's the reality of what the city of Prescott can actually do about that in a market-driven city like ours?
There are a lot of strategies that a community can undertake. One of the ones that's being considered right now by community groups is broader than the city, but would include the city as a partner, is there's a big push to establish a county-wide housing authority. And if we were to do that, that would be a vehicle that could funnel housing money into the community, which could address the affordability gap in various ways. It might mean, some of you may be familiar with Section 8 vouchers. If you have a housing authority, you have better access and more frequent access to Section 8 vouchers when they become available. So there is a big push to do that.
I like the idea of doing that at the county level. I'd be really concerned about the city becoming a housing authority, which they probably are anyway, the city council, but the city does not want to get involved in affordable housing in terms of subsidized housing or apartments or anything like that.
Well, a county-wide authority would have the advantages and would tamp down the disadvantages. As a matter of fact, the 2003 plan specifically recommended that the city not do a housing authority, and there were good reasons for that, one of which is that establishing a housing authority means that you have huge administrative costs. So if you can bundle your housing authority functions with a larger group, then you have some economies of scale.
Yeah.
One of the things that's changed in that arena in the last 10 years is there used to be a statewide, they didn't call it a housing authority, but it functioned as a housing authority, a statewide group that was available to communities to do those functions for communities that didn't have a housing authority. The State Department of Housing has changed, and that function is no longer available at the state level. So there is now more urgency to have a county-wide housing authority so that those monies can flow and that those functions can be provided within our community, because what was available to us in 2003 is no longer available to the community.
Do you have a question on that?
I'm just wondering I'm trying to follow where you are on your comments.
I had one comment.
Is this part of what your comments are, the housing issue?
Right. In both the memos that I sent with some actual language, one of the suggested additions is support from the city for establishing a county-wide housing authority. I believe that's in the land use section. It's also touched on in the economic development section.
That's what I was looking for, where you're referring to that.
Right,
Lynn,
right.
You had a comment?
Yeah, the only comment I wanted to make on the affordability within the city of Prescott, and the council has directed and taken some action. We had a tremendous large amount, and when you convert it into square footage cost, as a builder, our architects and developers here will tell you that within the city, the impact fees had a tremendous amount of effect on not building affordable housing within the city, basically because
And
of the
especially
impact.
multifamily housing.
Well, and in single-family housing.
And that's covered in the general plan. That's mentioned.
However, the council has taken action and revised those impact fees, and I think that in the future, starting right now, you're going to see some affordable housing built within the city on some of these lots that have been bypassed, simply because the impact fees have been reduced, and there's no longer a comparison that it costs you $15 a square foot more to build the same house in the city as it does in the county. And when those costs are narrowed, you're going to find the availability of people that want to have the city services come into the city and not have to pay a premium for it. I felt as an individual and as a councilman that it was unfair. I like what the council has done in terms of revising those impact fees, and I think it's going to be to the benefit of the city in the long run that they have been revised and that we'll see some affordable housing built within the community.
I agree with you. I think impact fees are certainly one of the factors that pushes the affordability gap for families in the community. So,
well, aside from, on top of that, one of my concerns was that the general plan, it does mention impact fees, and it's very briefly, and the impact on how that might be adjusted for affordable housing. But I would have liked to have seen that section expanded a little bit and get into the negative impacts of impact fees, how they actually slow growth and affect housing, and especially multifamily and affordable housing. So I would have, one of my comments was to expand that section a little bit, but so I'm glad you brought it up.
well, in all fairness to the General Plan Committee, the whole question of impact fees has been kind of a fleeting target, because the state legislature in the last 5 or 6 years has messed with this and has changed the rules several times and done 180-degree turnarounds on some of the requirements. So it's been hard for the city, as well as the General Plan Committee, to keep up with those changes.
Yeah, I know.
I think now that they're sort of sorted out, and it would be timely to do a more expanded section now that the legislation is not just changing week by week, but maybe year and a half by year and a half. The last kind of major grouping in terms of omissions is I had a lot of comments about planning processes. And the ways that we do planning, both for land use, and I was very concerned in particular that there was no discussion about transportation planning, and the city is involved in a lot of transportation planning, both internal to the city and regionally with their work, and they're partnering with the Central Yavapai Metropolitan Planning Organization. But yet there was no narrative and no strategies or goals that addressed transportation planning, and I had some comments about some of the other planning processes. So those were kind of the big things. I definitely had concerns about the flow and direction of Chapter 4.
Well, let's stay with transportation for a minute.
Okay.
I was surprised too when I read through it that there wasn't more emphasis on the need for not only for of intercity transportation, intracity transportation, and in the next 10 or 15 years, what's that going to be? It's not going to be bullet trains and streetcars, although some cities are going back to streetcars. It's going to be a bus system. And I don't know, in a one or two places in the general plan, the buses were even mentioned. They kind of blew it off because they said the funding wasn't there and it wouldn't be in the future and da-da-da-da-da. And that really surprised me, because to me it should be an important priority for this city, especially as it ages. And let's face it, it is a retirement city. People are moving here for the same reason they moved here. They've been moving here for 20 years. That hasn't changed. So that bus system, I thought it should have been emphasized in the plan, but it wasn't. But as far as the regional, but then I read an article in the paper all about the regional transportation system that you're talking about, and I was kind of shocked that all that was going on because I wasn't aware of it. So thank you for bringing that up.
Well, I think that the omission in the general plan is speaking to the planning and how that's done internal to the city and how that's done on a regional basis. I was surprised that that was left out. And I share with you concerns specifically about public transit. I've been a public transit advocate in this community for close to 30 years. I did have the benefit of several discussions with a member of the General Plan Committee, David Quinn, who brought that perspective. David and I had worked for several years on advocacy for a public transit system, and he was very knowledgeable, and I know he made a couple of presentations to the committee, and they took some of what he suggested and didn't take, but I know it was discussed, which is a good thing. But I think it's specifically some of the planning stuff that was left out that concerns me.
Okay.
I did have, again, going back to Chapter 4, I had concerns about the flow and direction of that, and was able to talk with the committee about that when we did meet a couple of months back, and the outcome of that was their requesting of me to revisit the summary pieces and see if I could come up with a better summary, because as we discussed it, I was suggesting that we take a lot of stuff out of Chapter 4, the summary chapter, and put it into Chapter 3 because I felt it was an expression of existing conditions as opposed to something else. And that's where I came up with a combined chapter and didn't lose any of the language. And in that combined chapter, I've got 2 or 3 paragraphs of suggested new language, but basically it's faithful to all of the language in both chapters and meshing it into one chapter, and thereby being able to eliminate some of the duplication, which, to Daniel's point, shortens the document a page or 2.
Okay. I don't know how much we're going to get involved in just making a determination of whether chapters should be combined. I personally didn't have a whole lot of problem with 3 and 4. I thought 4, the issue of rehab facilities in 4 should have been under balancing community values. But other than that, I didn't have a whole lot of problem with it. But as far as combining that, I'm not sure we want to make that decision.
Well, you have a draft that does that. Okay. If you want to recommend it or whatever. Okay.
The only other item I think I found in Chapter 4 that bothered me was the general plan draft stated that there's a conflict between the general plan and single family housing construction. I had a real problem with that. Because this city right now probably has 1,500 to 2,000 lots with all infrastructure built and water approved, ready to build, which would be a huge financial boon to the city, probably $30 or $40 million in sales tax and fees if those lots were constructed on. So I had a real problem, since I see that as the next big boon to the city in the next 10 years. It bothered me that the general plan said there was a conflict with that.
I think that in editing some of the language from the 2003 plan, the piece of that got lost in the translation. One of the issues that causes a conflict in the community is the loss of open space and view sheds. You know, people have this unrealistic expectation that if they build a house and there's a vacant lot next to them, that vacant lot's going to be there forever and ever.
Sure.
And when the owner of that vacant lot proceeds with development, the neighbor is upset because his or her view shed has just been disturbed, or his open space around his household has been disturbed. That's the conflict that the original language was trying to get at.
I see.
The other conflict is relates to not single-family housing, but multifamily housing. There is a bit of not in my backyard going on when you seek to place affordable housing, which is clustered housing, multifamily housing, and so forth. And sometimes people think that means undesirable neighbors.
Well, even senior housing. I mean, look what we've run against in the last couple of two or three projects that have come up.
I mean, that project in the ranch behind, on the hill, behind the Walmart Center is a prime example that is still a controversy in the community. The clustering of the housing as well as the height, etc. As I noted earlier, the general plan is a policy document, and in my comments, I have definitely noted some policy items to review, and I made a quick list of the main ones. The concept of village center, and we talked a little bit about that at the public hearing. It's time to revisit whether we still adhere to that, subscribe to that, or whether that's done and behind us.
To what? To what?
The concept of a village center.
Okay. Everyone we've ever tried to do has failed in the city. The one up on Rosser where now the center is, the senior center is.
The community center?
Julie Pinzola had that circled as a village center on the general plan. And we tried our best to get people to follow that village center idea, and since we live in a market-driven society, it just didn't work. So
the village center was originally
the city ended up getting that piece of property back and going and putting the senior center there.
Right. Well, the village center concept was in the Willow Lake South plan, and it was one of several plans that has a village center in it. But the surrounding neighborhoods did not like some of the aspects that might be included in a village center, and they actually banded together, came to the city, and made some amendments to the Willow Lake South plan that took out the bulk of the village center.
It sounds like a great idea, but being practical, it's tough to make it work because you're dealing with individual entrepreneurs.
I agree. My point is we need to revisit that as a community because we do continue to have the village center concept in some of our specific area plans, and yet when we go forward to implement it, we have some controversy, and we may be taking that out. So let's review it. Is it relevant for the city? If not, let's take it out of those plans. And that changes the kind of language in the general plan that refers to village center. So it's a policy item for review.
Yeah, I have a comment.
I have to.
Okay, Ken?
You know, I understand the village concept. I was in Phoenix 40 years ago when they started the village concept. I think the only one that had any relevance and it wasn't fully developed was the Paradise Valley area around Paradise Valley Mall, where they tried to incorporate employment in schools and parks around that shopping area. Some very light industrial type users, some warehousing over by Best Buys and that type of thing. It's a 40-year-old concept. It really hasn't hit on any community. I don't know why we're still talking about it, frankly. I understand what you're saying, that it feels that we should have something, but, you know, it really hasn't worked anywhere that I'm aware of. And to deliberate more and more and more on that topic really just belabors, I think, our process. There are some things I think we have to move past. One of the things
You're making my point for me. If we have to move past it, let's decide that and move past it.
I'm not arguing with them, but probably on that point I'm agreeing. One of the things that I'm finding is terribly missing in this whole plan, and maybe it was done intentionally. You guys know the answer because I'm not critical. I'm very respectful, like Joe was talking about. I find myself sometimes in a situation not sure what to object to or what to add to, because there's so many people that put so many hours into this plan and it's 100 pages still. And maybe that's because there were so many people putting so much into it. But I look at this, I see nothing about the future of the internet. I mean, Joe was just talking about that telephone over there, and there isn't a lot in here that I've seen. Maybe I missed it. I can tell you I haven't read every word of every paragraph as much as the committee has when you were on the committee here. But I think there's a piece missing as far as vision, as far in respect to employment of the internet world, of the telephone systems, the cable systems, the satellite systems. Gosh, we're dealing here on P&Z right now on cell towers, and we've got neighbors who are furious, both about the cell towers and not having cell service. And yet most of our life is going to be centered on the internet for the next 10, 15 years, and there's no mention in the general plan. I sit here thinking, gosh, should I say something about that? Maybe they talked about it.
Well, yeah, it's in broadband services.
Yeah.
That was brought up, but there's not much, but there are some statements in terms of improving the technology infrastructure.
So I guess what I'm saying is there's a lot of things that could change in this document, and if it's going to be a general document, we have a document. We're still tweaking words. I saw some words in here about its instead of theirs, and it's like, wow, aren't we past it after 3 years? Can't we deal with the concepts? And no offense, but
That's why I want you to write down your concepts.
well, I'd like to, but I can't. We can't even talk about it.
Yeah, we're talking about it. I've got 5 good items from Lindsay right here. I'm going to consider.
And I think that's a good call. I do agree with the internet, and I would point to the fact that the 2050 Visioning Committee that did some broad-based planning with lots of different committees, that was one of their big issues with a couple of committees, the one on economic development.
I was on the 2050. I was on the Finance Committee of the 2050 plan. But all I'm trying to say is this is a vision. It's a general plan, and I think we're getting pretty specific on some things. And maybe that's why it's been 3 years in the process, because we're trying to make it a general specific plan, or a specific general plan. There's a lot of effort that went into it. I think we have to respect the people. I think our role, and I don't really know our role, I'm just assuming our role, is to take what was handed to us, to make some suggestions if there's some things that we, from a community perspective as far as the viewpoint that the Planning and Zoning Commission takes, if there's some things that really should be emphasized stronger. I hear a lot of talk about 2003 and we're going backwards, and then we're starting to talk about the village thing again. And I'm not seeing enough of the future, and I think this is the future document. This is what we really should be looking at for the future of our community. And to have it include everything, I think, is foolish. And I think if we have it just as the concept of where we want our attitude to be, that'd be great. But I'm feeling bogged down by details.
Well, then concentrate on their concepts and which issues you feel should be given more emphasis. That's exactly all everything I've got comments on is either something I felt there should be more emphasis on or something I felt was omitted. I really don't have a lot of anything, complaints about most of what's in there, except one item. We'll talk about that some other time.
And I think that item is on my list too, Tom.
Okay. Go ahead.
Again, policy items that I think deserve some review, and depending on the outcome of the review, what's in the general plan may change. Annexation policy. The city's annexation policy was written in the early 90s, and we've had a lot of exceptions to the annexation policy. We've had a lot of reinterpretations of the annexation policy.
And a public vote on the annexation policy.
So I would suggest that the city's annexation policy is a policy item that we need to revisit and decide, yeah, the 20-year-old policy is good to go for another 10 years, or we need to change it in this way, or we need to dump it, or whatever. It's a policy issue out there that I think is causing some consternation and controversy in the community, so it deserves being revisited. Transportation planning, which we had said earlier, and specifically my bailiwick, transit planning, but the whole concept of transportation planning.
Public transit.
Right, and transportation planning, including all the aspects of planning for a transportation network, including roads and stuff. There was no planning in the circulation issue, either internal to the city or regional planning that we do for the regional.
I agree.
So,
One of my comments is, why aren't we planning for bus stops on our street improvements? Okay? One of my comments. So,
and you know, there's a couple of bus stops on Willow Creek Road that are there because when I was on council 15 years ago, I said, we're widening the road. Do we have any place we can put bus stops? Because there'll be a bus here sometime. So there's a couple of them.
It's going to have to happen because there's no other public transportation that's going to realistically happen in this city in the next 10 or 15 years.
That's right.
So come on, let's look at it.
Yeah. Okay, water availability and specifically its relationship to growth management.
Boy, do we have to talk about water?
That's a real thorny issue, but it is the issue, the elephant in the room. And a lot of, you know, if we can sort that out as a community and figure out what the policy is on that, we'll be ahead of the game.
Well, I mean, there's a study now that council has authorized, you know, a professional consultant, and hopefully that'll give us some direction in terms of where we go with that.
As long as they're moving ahead. As long as they're moving ahead with it, you know, along with federal.
I don't know what Jim has to say with it, but it was a fairly comprehensive scope, as I recall, that water consultant study, and it addressed most of these policy issues.
Well, that's what she's saying. You're saying, hey, let's do something. Let's look at it.
Right. And one of the things that was specifically taken out in a later draft, I think it was taken out between last February and the October draft, the city has had for several years, and it was due to Councilman Lamerson, has had in their water budget an allocation set aside for affordable housing. And that was taken out. Having that set aside available, and that's part of the water availability and its relationship to growth management.
That hadn't been taken out to my knowledge, so I thought we were looking at that to see if we could use our own definition of affordable houses, such as multifamily apartments, et cetera, because right now it was allocated to under federal guidelines, and so we weren't really able to use that, if that's my understanding. We just weren't able to use it because other than Dexter, we didn't have neighborhoods where that would really apply. You know, I don't think we even could use it for that Habitat for Humanity project over there in Dexter, could we? Just, yeah.
You're right, George.
You know, I think we all understand the importance in the general plan related to the water allocation and availability. So, you know, let's not beat it to death. Let's, you know, I'd rather hear what else you have to say.
A policy item for review.
Okay.
The dark sky. The dark sky was an addition to the general plan, which I think is a good one. But it maybe was a little too detailed. We talked about that before. I mean, the general plan is a broad-based document.
Let's talk about it again. Including residential in dark sky is a good idea, okay? But there shouldn't be specifics concerning lumens and you know, and all of that in the general plan. I mean, the degrees of Kelvin. Come on, give me a break. Let the professionals, or let staff hire the professionals to write that section. But yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
There's some stuff in there that shouldn't be there.
Yeah. So I totally agree with you. Including residential in the dark sky ordinances is good, but we don't need the level of detail that is currently in the general plan, because it's a general
It
plan.
shouldn't be telling me what size my landscape lighting should be, you know, I mean, come on.
Right. Another concept that's a policy item which was added, and again, I think it's a good thing to add, but it wasn't fleshed out, and that's the concept of complete streets. It's a concept I'm familiar with, having done a lot of transportation planning, and it's a good concept. One of the things that I did as I was reviewing the documents in the draft was looking for internal inconsistencies. And you have some language in some of the introductory chapters that speaks to complete streets, but you don't have very much that responds to that concept in the elements and in the strategies and the goals. So I think it's a great concept, but
in reality,
you know, what have we done with it?
In reality, the city has been implementing it, that concept throughout every street improvement. They got bicycle lanes, they got, you know, a lot of improvements, sidewalks they've added. So, you know, when you look at the street improvements the city has paid for, they're they follow the concept pretty well.
In
But
part.
maybe you're saying it's not outlined in enough detail.
It's not, there aren't goals and strategies that are responsive to that concept.
Okay.
And in the circulation element, the concept isn't terribly well defined. So I'm just saying that's a policy item to look at, review, and flesh out.
Okay.
And then the last one on my list is your favorite item, form-based codes, which was an addition to the plan, and I don't have any particular objection to it, but it's a radically different way of approaching codes, and I know where it came from. It came out of the discussions in the community that we had when we were doing the 2050 visioning, and the people that were on that committee were very committed to it, and they brought it forward to the city, and the city has adopted pieces of it. But it's a policy issue that needs to be reviewed and decide, you know, do we want that in here? Does it make sense? Is it in compliance or in conflict with our development code, which is the other document that provides guidance to development processes and land use, et cetera.
Okay.
So it's on my list.
Well, you're opening me up. You're opening it up for me to comment. I would guess that the only person on that general plan committee that even knows what form-based zoning is Ms. Wilcox, okay? Because I know that Jeff Zucker is a proponent of it. So basically the way I look at it, we've been refining our zoning code for 50 years here in the city. I think the UDC we have now is extremely sophisticated. I've been on the Planning Commission for, 16, 17 years, and there is no project that's ever come through here that we couldn't deal with under our UDC. And form-based zoning is a concept. It's basically a concept, okay? It's been used very little in the United States in very unique circumstances. It has no place as a zoning code equivalent to our UDC or as a parallel or equivalent code. I have no problem with it being mentioned in the general plan as a concept to be considered, which could be utilized by a developer within the PAD rules. Yeah. All we have to do is tweak those rules a little bit related to multi-use and density, and any developer who comes in wants to use form-based zoning concept, fine, let him do it. He wants to build 500 acres out by the airport and build a little English village with little shops below the apartments and a buggy whip factory across the street that you can walk to, that's fine. He can do that under PAD. So I feel it doesn't need to be, we don't have to ignore it. We can have it in here as a concept if a developer wishes to apply it. but it shouldn't be an alternative code, separate zoning code.
And they can do it within the PAD
Absolutely.
guidelines that we've
I
already
think
established.
they can. I don't know what the staff thinks, but
I think, too, I'm probably the same thinking. I think it ought to be out of the general plan, frankly, because we don't know what it is. It hasn't been, I love Prescott being progressive, but I don't even know what form-based zoning really means or what it's really going to look like. And I haven't seen enough examples in the stuff that I've read that gives me a sense of how you apply it to a community as diverse as Prescott. So while I would like to think that concept is great, I do think it can work within a development. And if we see how that can work, maybe someday we can apply it to existing property. But again, you're going to run into the situation about what rights you're protecting or trying to preserve for my property when you want to do something on your neighboring property that really isn't in compliance with what we all thought. So I think we're walking into a quagmire when we try to get progressive in some areas that haven't been proven. So I'd frankly like to see it out of the general plan completely, because I don't even know what it is.
Well, I think, we've seen all these building height things recently with the senior center and the church, the Mormon church steeple, the high tower for cell phones over there at Prescott Lakes, and I don't think PADs include a option to have 80-foot buildings. If, let's say you wanted to go out somewhere off of Williamson Valley, we annex that, and there's going to be this little village in there, and it's going to be high density, and there's going to be multifamily living in 10-story buildings and all that. This just provides a facility to do something like a planned area development without sticking us back into our codes and doing a special use permit or something for each thing. It just gives another vehicle for if there is a project that could do that in some specific area where.
Well, I'm saying that that's still possible. I don't think you're ever going to see any of it in Prescott because it's not market driven, and all development is market driven, or they got to be able to sell it. But I'm not saying eliminate it completely. I'm saying you can have a comment in the general plan related to it that if a developer wishes to consider it, he sure can. That's all I'm saying. But there shouldn't be a separate zoning code, an alternative zoning code that covers it, because, like you said, it's purely a concept.
But, PAD is almost kind of getting halfway there to where it's kind of a carte blanche.
That's exactly what I'm saying. It's a PAD is very, very flexible, and we wrote it that way. So, okay, thank you.
It's on my list as a policy item.
It's on my list, too.
I would agree with some of the comments that were made that maybe there's a more appropriate place to put it. When we were doing the general plan in 2003, the city was doing a major rewrite and revision of the Uniform Development Code.
Right.
And I understand that there has been some revision in the last year or two. There have been more revisions to that code that was adopted about 10 years ago. And I haven't followed that process as closely as I've followed this, but my opinion is that maybe form-based code needs to be a concept that's touched on in the general plan, but only in a very broad-based general way, and that the specifics, if we as a community want to provide specifics about how it might be implemented, are better in the Uniform Development Code.
And I will tell you that Councilman Arnold has requested that we have a UDC committee. I'm the chair. What am I? The chair? And on the code committee, and Councilman Arnold
I think that officially makes you a masochist.
Councilman Arnold has requested that we consider form-based zoning in the next UDC, one of the future UDC meetings, and actually get into it and discuss it and hammer it out. And so that's what's happening there.
Okay. I have tried to go back to be more conceptual. You certainly have all of the documents and all the comments with the detail that I provided. I'm happy to answer any questions or respond to any issues on that. I know that my comments, the depth and breadth of my comments have caused some consternation and some problems. And one of the pieces of that is that there have been staffing issues with the city. The planner that was assigned to this has since left the city and so on. So incorporating changes, I think, has been difficult. I need you to know that I have actually offered to work under the direction of the city as a volunteer to work on this document, to, you know, consolidate the stuff, whatever the city would like to use my time for, that's available, and I'm still willing to do that.
Well, great. You guys can work that out. And I really appreciate, you know, I didn't want to get into the nitty-gritty, and you got into a lot of it, but I really appreciate your list of concepts, because that'll help us. And is that it?
Yep.
Okay. We're going to take about a 5-minute break, everybody, and then we're going to come back and...
You want to take Elizabeth's comments before the break?
Oh, sure. Elizabeth?
Comments very quickly.
Oh, please.
Member of the public.
Please.
Mrs. Wilcox, Mrs. Zucker, came to this committee 2 meetings ago. The form-based code was discussed long before she ever arrived. She
okay.
never influenced that inclusion in the words of this plan. Also, remind you, lots of sales tax income from construction, but every residential parcel continues to cost all of us forever because they never pay enough in taxes to support the services. Bad news in a city and state which lives on sales tax. Mm-hmm. One thing I would like to remark now, I'm a member of the past generations, but I'm as tuned into the future as anyone you'll ever meet. I had to discuss a number of times the inclusion of the word telecommuting into the general plan. It changes everything. The village concept is no longer a valid concern, that we need a place where we can sit in our bedroom, get dressed, walk to church. That's not what we're talking about. Right. Telecommuting is changing the future of this community, not as fast as it could, because we haven't invested in the infrastructure we need. And the private sector's probably not going to do it for us because we don't have enough population. It's a big problem.
Mm-hmm. Excellent comments, Elizabeth. Thank you. That's your comment. You're saying exactly what 2 of the commissioners have been talking about.
I'm going to take a bite
Jim?
one more time at the apple. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Reality is an issue. Water is an issue. We have less than 300 acre-feet of water in our alternative water portfolio. And until such time as the mechanisms put into place to import water, that's what we have. Now, 300 acre-feet of water, or a little less, a little more, it's right in there somewhere, is by the current formula, 0.35 per single-family dwelling unit or 0.2 per multifamily dwelling unit, is an issue. Look at the reality from P&Z's perspective on what the future general plan needs to start forging. I mean, that is an issue. Okay? The proposed pipeline from the Big Chino is an issue. So.
You're right. Very good. Thanks, Jim. Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we're going to come back, and I'm going to start listening to commissioners' concepts. get real specific.
My comment really is an aside, but, and it's the question of public transportation and the future. And anyway, right now, Google's running, 25 cars around San Francisco with no driver at all. They're limited by regulations. They only let them go either 20 or 25 miles an hour. And Google's saying, it's not going to work. They're much more advanced in Europe because they have fewer regulations. If we really wanted to enhance public transportation in Prescott, we would tell Google, say, we will have no regulations on what you do. And they would, and I have a feeling they'd be here.
Build us some buses, huh?
Well, whatever. I mean, they build little cars.
They run themselves.
Call up on your phone, and they show up, and they take you. And anyway, it's in, some people say 10 years, some people say 20 years. That's how we're all going to be getting around. All I'm really saying is it's very hard to anticipate the future. And fewer regulations will promote it more than more regulations. That's all. That's my little libertarian talk.
Okay. You have any other comments on the general plan in terms of concepts or sections or?
Not really. I'll just respond to what you guys bring up. I'm not gonna toss more in on top of it at this point.
Okay. Nothing on any specific element in here, huh? That.
No,
I was, I'm on your side about the recovery homes. I really think we should have something in the general plan related to recovery and rehab facilities. And of course, we have to rely on the city attorney's office to help with that, so it doesn't create a lot of any trouble. But I certainly think that it affects neighborhoods and the quality of life so much that and that's exactly what the general plan should be dealing with. So I don't think we can ignore it. So you're the one that brought it up at the last meeting, and I totally agree we should have something in here related to that. So if you have any specific ideas on how to put that in, you certainly could put something together. Mark?
I thank you, and I'm
got an idea what Matt's going to say. We got the Federal Fair Housing Act that we're dealing with, guys.
That,
well, if we keep it fairly general,
exactly,
we can probably get away with putting something in there, and it's going to be something that recognizes both the rights of neighborhoods and individuals with disabling conditions. But it's maybe something that the city will continue to work towards refining, and
okay.
I'll try to come up with a blurb.
Okay.
If you want,
well, I think that's
really
going to be an easy one to reach a consensus on, that we want something in there. But
yeah, I just on that point, and I don't want to make too many specific comments this morning. I'm still processing. Yeah, I'm still processing this document, and the first thing I want to say is I think it's much too long. I think it's so long it's almost unreadable. And what I'm thinking of doing is just lining out every third sentence. I think it'd be a stronger document, maybe every fourth sentence. But that we have to shorten this document, make it more concise, and that's why. As a follow-on to what you just said, you said, well, we need another blurb. Why are we putting a blurb in and adding a couple of more paragraphs if it's going to be meaningless? If it's just going to be some kind of general verbiage. I mean, are we going to give direction to the council or not? And are we going to take a specific position or not? Because if we're not, then don't put it in there. Then it's just wasted words. And then my last comment this morning is I'm uncomfortable with the whole affordable housing concept, and I think I will suggest some more specific language at a future meeting after I've heard more the rest of the comments from the community. But I think, and I've said this before, all of housing is affordable, and I think because it wouldn't be built unless somebody is going to be able to buy it. I don't feel comfortable with the idea of building subsidized housing or bringing Section 8 folks in as an explicit policy. All right, yeah. So I think we need to rethink and rework that whole concept of affordable housing.
Okay, so when you're going through the document, check the places, affordable housing's mentioned, I don't know, half a dozen times, 6 or 8 times, so as you go through there, take a note of that, and see in what context.
And maybe try to bring it all together in
see
one
what
section.
context you're seeing it in.
And then have a very explicit policy that we can all come to a consensus on.
Okay. George?
Well, what I'd like to remind everyone of is that the meat of the general plan is the goals and the strategies. All this fluff that we're complaining is too much is just to educate the reader and to provide a background for why certain goals and strategies were determined. And so what we're recommending to the council and the community as a whole is contained in the goals and strategies, not all, and probably even less than half of the goals and strategies relate to things that the public sector or the city or the county can take action on and provide. A lot of the dependency is on the private sector, the nonprofits, and everybody to step up and do these goals and strategies that are defined in the general plan. It's a community vision. This is not a city of Prescott, here's what we're going to fund and here's what we're going to do plan. And so we need the whole community to implement this plan, and the intent is that the goals and strategies defined by the committee were all inclusive of what it is, the direction that we want to go. And that's where the emphasis should be placed in terms of reading and editing and making sure those are as complete as possible.
Using goals and strategies is kind of the primary.
Yeah, if I could say the shortened version of the general plan could be just printing the goals and strategies.
Okay. If we read through it and concentrate on that basis, I think that's a good approach. It's certainly not a mandatory document, okay? So you have to consider anything in there should not be, like a mandatory requirement or a recommendation. So goals and strategies is a good approach. Okay. And of course,
that was the basis at which we were going to update the previous general plan. The 2003 had the goals and strategies, and so a lot of as a process of the committee, we went through and reviewed the background and tried to say, has something changed here in terms of the background? And then for each section, we went through and identified, okay, now based upon the new information we see in this background information, now what is it we're going to do about it? And that was the goals and the strategies.
Okay. And I don't expect you to be coming up with any changes. So, Lindsay.
It is a mandatory document in that it has to comply with the state's Growing Smarter legislation, which requires a community like Prescott to establish a general plan no less frequently than every 10 years, and it has to address certain required elements like land use circulation. There's, I think, 5 or 6 required elements that you have to address, and you were free to add additional elements, which the city of Prescott has done with our last two with our previous plan, which the 2003 was the first one that came under the Growing Smarter legislation. But it is a requirement of state law, and it has to be ratified by the voters.
I meant more that it wasn't a document that requires specific action.
Or requires compliance.
Right.
It's more of a vision of what the community should do.
And the Growing Smarter legislation doesn't tell you how you address these things. It tells you that you have to address them, and that you have to bring that stuff together in a plan at least every 10 years, and that plan is subjected to the voters for ratification.
Right.
So those are the mandates.
Right. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, if I could ask Ms. Bell to help educate me here a bit. Is affordable housing, there's certain requirements that a general plan must have, right? And that's a state requirement. Is affordable housing one of those? I don't know.
No, what the Growing Smarter legislation requires is, it gets at that in 2 ways. It requires that and element B, land use. And land use, by extension, does involve subdivisions, neighborhoods, residences, et cetera. So that's where housing comes into that. It also requires growth management and cost of development as elements. And sometimes when you're talking about cost of development, the affordability question comes back in because things like the impact fees that we discussed earlier, which affect the price of residences and what the market will bear in terms of housing. But the legislation doesn't say you have to address housing. It says you have to address land use, and you have to address growth management and cost of development.
Thank you so much.
Okay, good. Any questions, Lindsay? Wait, she said no? Okay. Ken, now I'm expecting you guys to have some more comments at the next, on the 25th, okay?
Well, in reference to that,
I'm just trying to get you going here. What's any comments on concept?
in reference to the next meeting, I will not be here.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I'm not going away with Joe, but I was instructed that I needed to leave the area for at least a week, and that's what we're doing. I'll be coming back on the 26th, unfortunately.
Okay.
And I hate missing any meeting for P&Z. I think that's only the first or second one that I'll have missed. So unfortunately, I won't be here to give you all those comments. So I can give you an overview of my thoughts that in addition to what I've kind of alluded to so far. I started swimming with the document again. I kept thinking of what's the purpose of a general plan, and I started getting angry. I keep seeing these words, and they're just words, and they keep going on and on about stuff. And I decided I had to stop doing that because we had a lot of great people that spent a lot of time probably having to acquiesce to make the document what it is, to get it out of committee. There's one area I've been focusing on, and I think perhaps it's because I'm involved in it myself directly at the moment, and it relates to the sales tax. I'm not sure what direction this document tells the community the city wants to see us go in order to produce revenue for so many of the things that we're looking to provide the city to do. It's one thing to talk about how we use our parks and things like that, but we got to pay for all this stuff. And in the future, we're going to, if we do the pipeline, and I don't have any comment on that because I don't know anything about water, but there's going to be money needed for all these things. And I can tell you firsthand, because of my most recent involvement, I don't feel this document really says to the community how we want to produce some sales tax. What we kind of offhandedly say, well, and we would like to have this, and we want it neighborhood-based, and we talk about office use and professional use. None of that produces sales tax. Point blank, if I need to stop talking at some point, I will, about commercial retail, because I'm involved in a project right now. And I can tell you that in the last year, we have lost a couple of great prospects to other communities. Those sales tax dollars aren't coming to Prescott. They're going somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, on the general plan committee, it was specifically told by city staff, the city manager, the finance director, that is really a council's policy role, and the methods in terms of, business licenses or taxes here and there and all that, just to stay away from it, basically.
I appreciate that, and I assume there had to be something, but I can tell you, I think showing the community that community needs to have sources of revenue, whether that be, and tie it back to what I just discussed earlier with the internet. There are communities in this country that are charging internet taxes on sales. Our community, I can tell you, guys go down to, some of the guys I golf with go down to Dick's Sporting Goods, look at the item. Granted, it's PV, so who cares? But
get on the internet.
They look at the item, they see what they want, and they start shopping for it on the internet from their house in Prescott, and Prescott gains nothing from it. So when I'm talking about sales tax, George, I'm not talking that there has to be this focus on a direct thing. I think there has to be an emphasis that we're looking towards how to capture the retailers for our community, how to develop regions quite honestly, you know, and again, if I have to recuse myself in the future, I will. But I see nothing. We talked about the Fry's Grocery Store Center up on Willow Creek Road. That's a region that's now a neighborhood shopping area. And that's where you want to have neighborhood shopping. You want to cluster it, where we now have 40 acres of potential retail up there. I'm not doing a plug for my project, but I'm telling you that we have lost people because some of the things talk about Highway 69. The emphasis on Highway 69 in this document is profound. And I'm not sure it tells the community that the city and that we should be backing, and I don't know how you back it, but we should be promoting businesses to come into our community that really produce sales tax for those things that we buy. You know, there's no shoe store in Prescott to speak of. At least my wife tells me there aren't shoe stores. I can find shoes, but mine don't have 4-inch heels on them. And then never will. But I think the emphasis in this document should be on a general basis that there should be some emphasis. They talk about commercial, but then they talk about offices, professional. They talk about commercial and employment, and all of those are very important. But I'm not sure that we talk about how to attract that retail dollar, which is the vital sales tax dollar that we're missing, and it's going down the road. So that's my focus on here is mainly from that perspective of how to produce dollars to pay for all the things that we want to have in our community in the future, whether it be parks or pipelines. We need revenue to do that. And it's not just going to be the impact fees that does it. So that's my 4 cents.
Okay. I hope you're going to have more later, right?
Always.
Yeah, what I can add to that is under economic development strategies, I felt there should have been something in there on the construction industry. It's been totally ignored in the general plan, and it can be a huge financial shot in the arm to the city in the next 10 years. So, okay. Len?
I gave you my comments.
You gave me your comments.
I noticed before the break that Councilman Kuknio joined us, and he was on the general plan, so that makes,
okay.
With Terry Marshall not here as chairman, Councilman Kuknio and George Sheets and Terry and myself were all on the general plan, and we were part of those that by consensus agreed to move this document up to P&Z and have a discussion and come up with a recommendation from P&Z to send it to council. And that's what I'm prepared to do.
Okay, I appreciate that, and we're going to get another opportunity here on the 25th. I hope you're here because we may need everybody here to get a
quorum.
A lot of the issues I've already spoken on that I had to do with housing trends. I thought there should be more emphasis on the fact that in the next 10 years, the majority of most multifamily housing will be senior housing in adult communities, more than affordable housing, I would think. I think affordable housing in the city is an oxymoron, but we'll see, oxymoron. I think there needed to be, in housing trends, more emphasis on the fact that Prescott will continue to be a retirement destination. I think the current population says people over 65 comprise 45% of the population. That's incredible, and it's growing every day. And everything that made Prescott popular in the past is still here, you know. So, and I think I've already emphasized that I thought in the housing trends that the majority of new housing construction in the next 10 years will be the fill-in construction of all the pre-existing, ready-to-build, all infrastructure in single-family lots. They're all sitting out there. I think that'll also be the next financial boon, but I mentioned that. Let's see, form-based zones, codes, you know how I feel about that. We talked about that. Let's see. Balancing community values. I discussed within balancing community values that we should have something in there on recovery rehab facilities. We discussed that. I'm just kind of giving you a brief outline of what I'm going to be giving you later. Downtown. No mention of future parking garage needs in downtown. I was really shocked by that because it takes, what did it take? 20 years to get the last parking garage built? So if you've got a 10-year plan, shouldn't you be thinking ahead about the potential need for additional downtown parking? I was really surprised that that wasn't even mentioned in the general plan. Or the additional purchase of additional parking lots for the future. Impact fees, we discussed that. I think Len gave a good presentation on that. Public transportation, I think Lindsay gave a good, she knows how I feel. You guys know how I feel about that. I think the only public transit you're going to see in the next 10 years is going to be a bus system. So the general plan better start emphasizing it. Lakes. I was surprised there was no mention. Our lakes are a wonderful asset, and you go out there and they're empty. Why are they empty? Because as soon as they stock fish in it, everybody comes for a couple days, and then they're gone. I was surprised that the general plan didn't incorporate that the city would be working in concert with State Game and Fish, developing more outdoor recreational opportunities with our lakes. I think they need to do that. I think it should be in the general plan, at least a mention of that, including stocking of fish and programs for kids. And you know, there's a whole bunch of things that Game and Fish does. I think that should be in that lake section. Dark sky, you guys, we discussed it. Everybody seems in agreement with it. We do need residential dark sky codes, but they should be written by the staff and experts and not by the general plan committee. And let's see, the employment section. I had already mentioned that I think we needed to encourage and promote a strong construction industry. Maybe a little more emphasis on that. So that's an outline of my concerns, my conceptual only. So I don't have anything else. If you guys, anybody else would like to speak while we're here today?
Mr. Chairman, just a reminder that as we talked earlier in the meeting, if the commission members would like to put their focus areas or discussion items together and get them to us, we will compile them and distribute them back to you in full compliance with the open meeting law.
Good. Sounds good.
Again, don't email each other.
Okay.
Only him.
I don't have their emails.
Could you
I don't either.
give me a
I
date?
thought you said you were done.
He's the editor, right? Okay, if there's nothing else,
Ask George, a date
check
for
my
submission.
agenda here. Any
Say the 15th of,
last thing.
15th of
Dan?
September.
When we're talking about affordable housing, just keep in mind what we're really talking about is housing that is affordable to those who are working in the low-paying jobs here in town. Because right now, what we have is a lot of these people who have to commute out of town. They're doing their shopping near where they live. So we have a lot of people who are earning their money here, taking it out of the area and spending it in Chino Valley or Prescott Valley. If we would concentrate on a little bit on saving these people the commute and allowing them to live in Prescott in affordable housing, that's what we mean when we say affordable housing, is what's also known as workforce housing.
workforce housing is probably a better term.
It's a sales tax issue.
Certainly.
Follow the money, follow the money. All right, anyone else? Anything, George, on city updates?
No, sir.
Anything we should know about city council actions or?
Nothing at present, no, sir.
Okay.
We're planning to move the the items that you took action on last meeting. The cell tower the cell towers will probably go to council late next month.
Okay. And anybody who's not going to be here for the next meeting, make sure you tell Suzanne so she knows whether we even have a quorum. Okay, we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Well, the next meeting is the 11th of September.